here on the West Coast, bright and early for you guys. I'm Chris Spags, ready to go game by game. And my first show with our new rising star here on the channel, of course, his own YouTube channel, just hit 10,000 subscribers yesterday. So congrats, Sal. Sal Vetri at Sal Vetri DFS. How are you doing, Sal?
Good, thank you. I appreciate that, man. Yeah, I'm excited for our first show together. Let's see how this goes. Week 4, the game by game right now. We have a game less because of these buys, so a little bit lighter, which is good for content wise. Just makes it a little easier. But yeah, I'm excited to break it down, man. Excited to break it down with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun here. We got two fast-talking Italian dudes, so you don't get that enough in the DFS space. A lot of non-ethnic types out there with their backwards cap. So support our backwards cap. Well, my backwards cap. I'm carrying all the backwards cap weight for us today. But also, guys, hit that like button before we start everything up. And of course, we want to say thank you real fast to our sponsor, Yahoo Sports. Yahoo Daily Fantasy is bringing you this show every single day, and we really do thank them for that. But you should be thanking them for their no management fee tournaments. They have the Yahoo $1 Million Baller going up this week, another big tournament now where you're hand building entries on that one. You're adding a lot of value to your process by doing that hand building, not competing with as many sharp players who are just dropping in a CSV chock full of lineups. So go check them out at yahoo.com. You can also get $30 free with your deposit in YSRPs or Yahoo Sports Reward Points. Those are just like money on there. So go to yahoo.com right now. If you want a direct link, there's one in Emacs Spotlight Stacks and Hitters article down on the homepage at awesemo.com. Just click right there. Use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. Get your $30 with a $30 deposit. I believe is the benchmark you have to hit there. Go check it out because these tournaments that we have, a lot of our sponsor sites, there's overlay every single week. And when you are a new player, overlay is key. And also one other quick plug, all the data that we're referencing today throughout the show is going to be available to you at awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code NFL strategy to go get half off your first month of Awesemo Plus. A lot of great packages in there, including ones that are just $3.95 a week, $3.95. So go check them out at awesemo.com/join. Get in the mix. You know all the things that we know because we are so smart and so savvy. All right, Sal. Let's do it here. Let's talk about high-level thoughts because I'm sure, much like me, you've probably played with some hand builds, probably run a few crunches. Anything overall that you're seeing in the lineups that you've seen that you want to just bring to the people? Like, what are you noticing? What are you landing on? Anything weird construction-wise?
Yeah, I think something that stands out is when you're running these lineups, you're going to get just whether you're hand building or really honestly through Fantasy Cruncher, you're going to get a ton of just Wayne Gallman. And I think it's really important. And we'll get into it what type of a play he is this week, but it's really important to realize that he's like a below average pass catching running back. So you're not really wanting him to pop up if you're doing any team stacks with the Giants or anything like that. So just make sure that you have groups set right, but also that you're not getting, since he's already going to come in a ton, you're not getting a ton of him already with like 2 pass catchers because it's almost overkill at that point in terms of having 4 or 5 Giants in your lineup. So I think that's one thing that I noticed right away is that he's going to pop up in so many lineups and it can get really messy if you're not paying attention to how he's popping up.
You're going to be a very popular play this week. And as Sal mentioned, we will talk about the ownership as we go as well, which you get with that Awesemo Plus membership. But Gallman looked like he's going to be the chalk play of the week. He's a guy who does project well, but perhaps some causes for concern with him because he's not Saquon Barkley. That's going to give you some pause with any running back. But that is the second game we're going to hit on. The first game we're going to hit on, according to my sheet here and how they are displayed, New England Patriots getting 25 implied points in a matchup heading into Buffalo. Bills Mafia 3-0 to start the year. My boy Josh Allen been looking good, but getting only 17.5 implied points for him. 2 defenses here have been really solid. The prices here are reasonable. The ownership extra reasonable. Nobody can have over 1% ownership, it seems like, besides Julian Edelman, who you would kind of think does get some here, being the slot man. He is healthy. He is practicing. That chest looks good to go. Josh Gordon going to be seeing Tre'Davious White on the outside, which is not a fantastic spot for him. This game, Sal, I think could be a bit of a shootout. And I think that sort of like the defenses are what they are, but I do think there's a possibility that happens. We saw some success last year for Buffalo passing against a New England defense that wasn't quite as good. Now they are really good. Wouldn't shock me, though, if this game ended up having a little more scoring in it. How are you feeling about it? Because I think a lot of people are just going to avoid, and the defenses have looked great, but, things can happen in the NFL.
Yeah, right now it's almost like a stay away spot for me. On the Buffalo side, I've been on Josh Allen, John Brown combo probably each of the first 3 weeks. I know like Josh Allen's your boy, and honestly, I love like just watching this kid play and how he plays for fantasy. But you look at it, and Stephon Gilmore is for sure just going to be shadowing John Brown, and that's a terrible matchup for John Brown. And then when I look at how Josh Allen moves the ball after that, it's really hard to kind of see how this team is going to just generate points, which is kind of being shown by this implied total. So from the Buffalo side, just not getting a ton. I usually would only get to Allen and Brown. From the New England side, it's interesting because yeah, AB's not there again, so Philip Dorsett's getting some love. But the way that Buffalo plays on defense is you're not going to beat us deep. You're not going to beat us over the top. They've only allowed 2 plays of 20 plus in the passing game all year. So Josh Gordon's going to have shadow treatment from Tre'Davious White. He did not do well with shadow treatment when they played Miami and Xavier Howard. White, similar caliber type of cornerback. Philip Dorsett, I don't have much interest in because of the zone defense. I think Julian Edelman, he practiced yesterday. He's the main guy that I look at here. James White should be back, so that's going to cut into Burkhead a little bit. It's really just Julian Edelman. There's going to be a lot of short passes that'll be completed against the zone defense. You look at Tyler Boyd last week. So for the most part, a stay away game. Edelman in that price range, in my opinion, is hard to get to compared to guys around him. But he's the main spot I look at. The backfield with James White coming back is the next best option in terms of passing. No interest in Sony Michel. And I think it's important to point out that James Devlin is now on IR, which is going to change up the amount of formations that they use, just in terms of not having a fullback on the field, running more wide receiver sets, whether it's 3 or 4. So just Edelman's like the main thing here, but for the most part, it seems like a stay away for me.
Yeah, you mentioned the Devlin one. That's something that is important because I was reading something this week. I forget where, so I don't want to not attribute the tweet, but somebody talking about a Sony Michel pretty much exclusively is in sets in which there's a fullback in there with Devlin in front of him. And there is another fullback they have whose name escapes me, who I know they apparently have high hopes for, but it's based on the snap counts, it's hard to imagine him fully getting James Devlin's role. But that could affect Sony Michel here. I think on paper, just when I see a spot where it's like, wow, people just are across the board assuming the defenses are going to be the ones that control here. And, the implied total does back it out. I do think there is some opportunity to just go into those games and hoping that there is some better success. Like Josh Allen has been decent this year. A lot of his picks have not been the boneheaded Josh Allen picks that maybe we saw last year. One of them was last week, but overall, I've watched all his games because I am a hardcore Allenophile. But I do think that there could be a spot here where maybe Buffalo does get something going. Might not be enough to game stack, might not be enough to fully have that potential you want to see for a GPP, but whenever you have a game, there's a lot of smart ownership I've noticed so far this season. And when there's a game with just no ownership at all, that could be an opportunity. How about the defensive Sal? Because New England can certainly generate some turnovers against Josh Allen for the reasons if he does regress to last year where he was a lot more inaccurate, a lot more sloppy with the ball. Would you play the New England defense here?
Yeah, I think getting to New England's defense, if you want to pay for it, is totally fine here. The implied total works to their favor, and just the size favorites out there are good. I do think that like Josh Allen as sort of like a one-off play, just naked, is viable. It's definitely on a slate where you have so many, in my opinion, just quarterbacks that we'll get to in that same price range that I would rather get to. But I mean, Josh Allen right now is right there with Lamar Jackson, 9 rush attempts per game, only second to Lamar Jackson, 35 rushing yards per game through 3 games. So there is upside there just in terms of what he could bring to the table on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's keep it moving here. And also, this game has some news, apparently, which the YouTube chat is talking about right now. Washington getting 23.3 implied points against the Giants. We're getting 25.8 implied points of their own. Obviously, Danny Dimes is the big story here, but the bigger story from a DFS perspective is that neither defense can stop the passing attack at all. We saw Mitch Trubisky get back on track last week. Taylor Gabriel, or rather on Monday night, God, this all time just blurs together when you're doing all these shows. But on Monday night, Mitch Trubisky getting back on track, exploding with Taylor Gabriel as the captain there, and Allen Robinson still carving out some usage for himself. That looked like a good spot. But Case Keenum as well has been passing the ball well. Unfortunately, it seems like he has a foot injury, which is putting his status in the question. Colt McCoy is also back in practice. Keenum, to me, was a sneaky play. I really like the vibe that he's had with his receivers. Even though he hasn't looked great, certainly got his ass kicked by the Bears defense. Still looked pretty good throwing the ball to Paul Richardson. Has looked very good throwing the ball to Terry McLaurin, who's running a lot of routes, getting a lot of deep targets. This game is really interesting to me all around, and the Giants' ownership as well. Let's talk about the Washington side first, because the Giants kind of deserve their own little segment here. Sal, how are you feeling about Washington here? And I guess, how does this Case Keenum thing affect things? Because he's in a walking boot right now. That doesn't bode well for him.
Yeah, I saw that he didn't really suit up yesterday. And also, walking boot news, that's new from what I've seen. I mean, we just have to see what happens tomorrow, I guess, is the final indication. There's been people trying to volley for Dwayne Haskins to get in. There's a reason why Dwayne Haskins, is not the starter on this team. Apparently, he looks very, very raw. We saw signs of that in the preseason. So we just have to keep an eye on what happens here. Clearly, if Keenum can't go and you're going to get Haskins or something comes up later in the week, well, then you kind of get question marks around a really popular play, or at least one that should be popular, in Terry McLaurin. So I think Keenum, if he does play and he is fine out there, he's viable at his price point. He projects out really nicely. He grades out really nicely against the dead last pass coverage defense of the Giants right now. There's just no talent in that secondary with no Landon Collins anymore. But on Washington's side, we have to kind of wait and see what happens now with Keenum. Maybe it's just a Thursday thing. Maybe it's precautionary. Terry McLaurin is the best play on the team. Right now, it's interesting because like he has a sub 20% market share of targets, and he's still leading the team. So it just shows you how often that they're spreading the ball around, really. So he's the main option there. He's going to get to go up against Janoris Jenkins, who has just been head on a swivel nonstop with guys getting by him. So I do like Terry McLaurin a good amount for that price point. Probably the best wide receiver below 5K. Yeah, there's a lot in this game on both sides. Chris Thompson, he's fifth right now in routes run for a running back at 79. You have Alec Ogletree, a linebacker, probably maybe the best linebacker for the Giants right now, being questionable for week 4. That helps Chris Thompson in the game script. That should favor him. And then Trey Quinn, for some reason, is $3,000. Like, Trey Quinn is priced as if he doesn't step on the field, and he's run the 13th most routes in the entire league this year. He's run 117 routes. He is probably not a tournament play for me. Like, I don't think he can get you the 20-plus points you want, but he's more than viable in cash games. If he's going to be $3,000 flat and out there for 90+% of the snaps, running 50 routes in this game or 40 plus routes, yeah, he's viable in cash games for sure. So I think there's a lot from both sides. The Washington side, McLaurin stands out as a really good play. Thompson, if you want to stack Washington, but I'd rather stack the other side of this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think if Keenum is in there, I have a little more faith in his ability just because he's throwing the ball so much. Throwing it 41 times per game with a 69.4% completion rate. So even better than nice, you could say, for that. But I think really just his willingness to throw the ball downfield has been helpful. That's kind of come back down to earth a little bit. It's only throwing 3 times over 20-plus yards now, but still overall, that Bears game kind of did pull him back to earth a little. But a guy's been willing to throw it downfield. And I think, as you mentioned, McLaurin, a guy who I really like a lot, getting 15.3 air yards per target, getting deep down the field, getting over 2 20-plus yard targets per game. And that's good for him because he's an explosive player who can break one at any time. As you mentioned, a lot of routes being run by these guys. 39.7 routes per game for McLaurin, 39 routes per game for Trey Quinn, who's much more of a short-range target guy, but could certainly dink and dunk his way, kind of like Darren Waller did last week, to a big day. So I don't know. I'm intrigued by the passing attack here. I would exercise one bit of caution, though, with Chris Thompson, where the game scripts are certainly going to favor him where they're getting blown out. And, even though the defense can certainly get blown up for Washington, I don't think they get blown out enough where Thompson gets run. I think this actually could be more of a Peterson day.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the only thing there with Thompson would be in terms of just more upside. But yeah, either way, like whichever running back's out there, it's not stable or consistent at all.
Yeah. And I think with Peterson too, the thing for me is in a game script where they're close and they're kind of keeping it in, within their pocket, which I think they can do, especially if Keenum's out there, but that's a big question mark heading in. I think that's certainly a situation where Peterson's going to get more touches. He's still been getting 11 attempts per game, getting 2.5 targets per game. If he gets up to 17, 18 touches, I think that wouldn't surprise me too much. At his price point, as one of the very few unknown pieces in this Washington, it's crazy that Washington's chalk already, or chalky. But Peterson is a pivot there who I think could have some value. You could easily see him having one of those big 80-yard days with 2 touchdowns. I think wouldn't be crazy here if McLaurin falls down at the 1-yard line and then just Peterson capitalizes. Let's talk about the Giants side here because they are going to be very popular. Daniel Jones going to be one of the top owned QBs. Wayne Gallman, we discussed, going to be one of the top owned position players. Evan Ingram's ownership also soaring now too, extremely high for him, the top owned tight end on the slate. And Sterling Shepard, a guy I talked about yesterday with Nolan Kelly, who has some really positive factors going for him, generating a lot of separation for him on each target that he has, one of the better numbers in the league for a wide receiver, and also been doing a good job just running a lot of routes, running just under 50 routes per game, running 46.5, which is a lot of routes for a guy who is also a short-range target in a wide receiver core where they don't have really anybody of value there until Golden Tate comes back in. So, Sal, which Giants pieces are you trusting? And let's talk about the pass game first. We'll save Wayne Gallman as kind of the main course.
Yeah, definitely. Right now, Daniel Jones for me is my number 2 quarterback on the week. Just really like this spot for him overall against the secondary of Washington. It's terrible. I mean, now you have Josh Norman outside the top 100 in terms of quarterback grades, cornerback grades. So not looking great. Bottom 8 defense for Washington in the passing game, bottom 5 when it comes to pressure. And you saw mobility from Daniel Jones. So I like this spot for him a lot. And when you factor in the price point, it just gets better. Like the reason why he's a QB2 right now for me on Thursday is because of the price point. It just grades out so nicely in terms of projection. Price point makes it even better. Evan Ingram, we'll talk about another guy later, but I have like a 1A, 1B tight end for this week when it comes to like cash. But when you factor in ownership, Evan Ingram's ownership right now is through the roof, and it makes sense. Like, I don't know why DraftKings is allergic to the 6K range when it comes to pricing tight ends, but he's still way too cheap by potentially even $1,000. So makes sense that the market's on him right now. The public's on him. I think there's viable pivots when it gets that high. But he has 4 red zone targets this year, 25% of the red zone target share, 10 targets per game, leads all tight ends, and it's up there for receivers as well. So he's in play. Sterling Shepard is the one that I like the most here. The price tag didn't come up enough. He's top 8 in the league. You mentioned it when Nolan said top 8 in the league in separation, 4.2 yards per out run, or 4.2 yards on average of separation. It's just really, really good. He was 3rd on this slate right now. And last week, 80% of his routes came out of the slot, which we know is favorable, especially for a young quarterback. So I'm not really messing around with the Darius Slaytons. I know that he had a nice game, really carried by one big catch. Right now, if you're stacking this, it seems clear that it's Jones, Ingram, and Shepard. And running it back with McLaurin makes the most sense if Keenum is going to be out there and healthy. So I favor Sterling Shepard if you're trying to get a single pass catcher with Daniel Jones over Ingram, just mainly due to the ownership. And I think there's a lot more viable pivots, or maybe not a lot more, but one really strong viable pivot off of Ingram for like a third of the ownership.
Yeah, I'm fully with you on Sterling Shepard. The fact that he's generating over 4 yards of separation while running out of the slot and also not running deep downfield, he's only getting 8 air yards per target. Like that bodes well for him. He's finding really good gaps in the coverage. Against the Washington team, who, as you mentioned, is a terrible secondary, not well graded by PFF, not as bad as the Giants secondary, not as bad as Miami secondary, but certainly in that tier just below it. I think Sterling Shepard could strafe him this week, and at that price point under 6K, I'm willing to take that. And I think, Daniel Jones showed enough to me. I didn't love his pocket presence. I did think that he kind of didn't feel guys behind him, which Christopher Harris, I think on his podcast is saying that's actually a positive, that at least he's not getting gun shy and getting rid of the ball too early. You want your guy to be holding in a little bit longer in the pocket. But, that could certainly lead to mistakes if they do generate pressure, which Washington probably can't do because they are not generating a pass rush at all. Just the 4% sack rate for them on the year. All right, let's talk about Wayne Gallman because he is going to be very popular. Certainly a cash game lock, I would say. Not, we often don't use the word lock on this channel. I certainly never use that word. For cash, though, at that price point, knowing what his ownership is going to be, I find it hard to believe he's not a lock in cash. For tournaments, I might just entirely go with a different construction. I might try to find some price point pivots, or we might land on some throughout the course of the show. I just don't think Gallman's that talented. I think we didn't see him used in a way that's going to be anything similar to Saquon. You mentioned earlier in the show his lack of pass catching ability. Hasn't been well targeted so far. That certainly can change, but even if he does get targeted more, I don't know that he has the upside to break them like Barkley does. Certainly can't break a play out of nowhere. Does not have that kind of athletic profile. So how are you feeling about Wayne Gallman? I guess your thoughts on both cash and, which it seems much more obvious play, and GPPs.
Yeah. You mentioned it in cash right now. He's coming in as what I'm seeing on the site is the 3rd highest owned. I think it's actually okay. Like I think he should probably be the highest owned player on the slate. And I think the ownership is probably a little bit too low if I was entering a ton of lineups, but I like stick primarily to 3 max. So I might just get what the ownership is. But yeah, for cash games, he's totally fine. Look, the way that I project it out in terms of trying to project plays and then how many running attempts you have, I have Wayne Gallman getting here 18 touches total in this game. So if he's $4,600 and going to get 18 touches, it's just a really good play for any format. The ownership's getting high, so always a guy that's not proven being a fade in a GPP for you if you're playing a ton of lineups and you want to come in under the field, or if you're just playing a 3 max and want none of him. I completely agree with that. I've been kind of leaning that way the first 3 weeks for chalky players, but I think this is a good spot for a guy that, look, he's not going to leave the field. They have Elijah Penny out there who's a fullback, so some people might think he's still a running back, or a halfback. He's a fullback. They called up Hillman off of the practice squad, who they showed no faith in the preseason or even in camp, really working with the first team for ball security and really just pass blocking is where Wayne Gallman is going to make sure he stays on the field. He's the last 3 years has been a very good pass blocking running back. He's been an average running back between the tackles and probably slightly below average in the receiving game. So yeah, we talked about it earlier in tournaments. When it comes to stacks, I would not have Wayne Gallman in a group, but if you want to play him as a one-off in any type of format, I think it's totally fine. He's a viable fade option as well, but it's a really good spot where I lean to get to him here. You get a bottom 5 run defense in Washington, and there's just no competition for touches where he could potentially have a 20 touch day if things go right for this Giants offense.
No, that makes sense. And I think the volume, that is always the king in the NFL, is that you just know guys. We talk about routes run. That's an indicator of opportunity. And it's knowing the fact that Saquon's leaving 16 to 20 touches behind, possibly more if you kind of positively regress to his workload last year. It's certainly a nice opportunity for Gallman. I think just for tournaments, though, I just would be reluctant to exceed. He's going to be 30% owned according to projections right now. That can probably go up a little bit. Obviously, the ownership projections at Osmo.com tend to get more accurate as the week goes on. So it wouldn't shock me to see him closer to a higher number, especially in the big field tournaments with maybe less sharp players. I think to me, he's just a match the field guy. If you are kind of MMEing, You mentioned you're a 3-entry max guy, but how would you handle that if you were putting in like a 150 tournament? Like, would you want to get to the 30%? Because I think I'm okay with that because of his value and the potential for touches. But I really wouldn't want to go above the field significantly because I think you're just going to be left holding the bag more often than not in that situation.
Yeah, I think it depends on like what the rest of, I guess if you're entering 150 lineups and he comes in at 30%, I think I actually do want to take a stand and get a little bit more. Probably somewhere around maybe 40% of them here. Just it's a really good spot where I don't want to overreact to how this offense looked last week, but it's going to move the ball better with Daniel Jones at the quarterback compared to Eli Manning, and you just have a top five, top three, maybe even matchup against this Washington defense in a spot where you're not like we had Josh Jacobs a couple weeks ago as a big underdog against a really good offense. You're actually a home favorite against an offense that has, I would say, a lot lesser of a chance of actually getting up big on you and forcing you into a game script where you're not on the field. So if I think he goes on the field for 90% of the snaps and sees 16 touches at the minimum I have for him right now, I really like the amount of just overall volume you get. And also, I think it's important to point out that like this slate for running backs is really, really thin. We don't have a lot of the top end guys, and a lot of the middle of the pack guys either have difficult matchups or concerns just around their overall matchup and usage. So I just think it's really easy to get to him. In like three maxes, it's a decision where like I'll probably have to make if I just want to match the field or just have none. And I think I'll probably end up matching the field at just the 30% with one of them in a lineup or something along those lines.
Yeah, no, that seems like a fair approach. And yeah, I think there's certainly, I think as long as you know kind of the pros and the cons of playing him going in, I think that's something just to keep in mind when you're building your lineups is that, if you are chalkier in other spots where you have a guy who's a little lesser owned, paired along with him, then that's fine. I think people tend to overthink and that certainly I did too when I was starting out as a DFS player, where you do kind of overthink it and you go like, oh, I need the 1% guys. Like, no, you just need to have a couple lower owned guys with Gallman to kind of get you off that same path that everybody else is going to be on. So everybody's going to have Gallman. My particular sentiment after crunching some lineups and looking at some stuff, I think people are going to have McCaffrey, Eckler, and then Gallman in the flex. So if you went to another guy like a wide receiver in the flex instead who has a bigger upside, like a Mecole Hardman type, I think that could be a play. But just think about ways to differentiate because I think that is sort of the thing overall with Gallman when you're playing him this week is that ownership can soar.
Yeah, I'll jump on that and I'll just say that I actually really do agree with you that this week is like a really good week to use that flex position on maybe not a tight end, but definitely a wide receiver because there's a lot of cheap end wide receivers that probably have bigger upside more times than not than Gallman.
Yeah, I would agree. Defense is here real fast because we do have Daniel Jones. He, as I mentioned, getting a lot of pressure last week. He is a running quarterback, so that could result in him hanging in the pocket a little more and kind of having some mistakes that come from that. He had 11% sack rate in his debut. Not any turnovers or not any INTs. Rather, did have some near turnovers with the fumbles and all that. I think there is some chance the defense here could be a player getting a lot of leverage on the field if somehow Washington did kind of cobble together a passable game, or the Giants defense on the other side as well. Would you have any of these defenses here because they are, priced well enough where they could have value?
Yeah, I think you have two unproven quarterbacks, so like the defenses are definitely in play. I always like targeting home favorites, so like the Giants defense is where I would lean there. It just like over the long term ends up being a better play for opportunity. And when you have potentially a hobbled Case Keenum or even a backup quarterback coming in, I probably lean the Giants defense there if I had to pick one of them. Both teams though struggle at getting pressure, which usually leads to turnovers, so that's worrisome. But all it takes is one, so I'd lean the Giants out of both of these.
Okay, that seems fair. Let's keep going here. We got another game here. It's going to have a good amount of ownership for a few position players. The Chargers getting 29.3 implied points, heading into Miami, who's getting 14.3 implied points. Everybody's been beating up on Miami, but they did hang in pretty close to the Cowboys until they kind of pulled away down the stretch. The Chargers have had their own issues here, though they are getting Melvin Gordon back, reportedly going to be returning to the team today, though not expected to be playing in this week. So chalk Austin Eckler is in play. His price is up. He had a kind of down week last week where he did lose some snaps back to Justin Jackson, which could be a bit of a concern here because this game maybe won't be competitive for long. Keenan Allen exploded last week, has been one of the best receivers on the year, getting 14 targets a game, a 36% target share, getting targeted deep downfield more, 2.7 targets at 20 plus yards this year, which is up from 1.5 last year. So that's, they're spreading him out. They're doing more. He's also one of the top routes run guys, running over 40 routes per game, 41.3 for him. The Allen chalk is scary because if they pull away here, I think it is a spot where you might not see them throw quite as much. Certainly Allen can contribute. You could also see some things go to Mike Williams, which is a bit scary. And Eckler, we talked about the Justin Jackson thing. I think that's been something that a lot of people were concerned about heading into the year. And I'm willing to play Eckler because this does seem like the kind of spot where you could have 2 touchdowns really easily without even having to do much. How are you feeling about a chalky Eckler, and who would you prefer out of a chalky Eckler or a chalky Keenan Allen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I prefer the chalky Keenan Allen here, even in a spot where Miami is allowing the most rushing yards, 208 rushing yards per game, which is just ridiculous through 3 games right now. I think there's like so I guess I would say that I love both running backs here, but Justin Jackson at his price point, I think there's some merit to saying he's potentially as good of a play as Eckler. I mean, Eckler's going to grade out projection wise really good, but when it comes to GPPs, you're looking for leverage cheaper plays, especially as a pivot maybe off of a Gallman. I really do like Justin Jackson. And I think there's some merit to Melvin Gordon's coming back next week. And Justin Jackson pretty much becomes irrelevant on this depth chart. Like he's going to go to seeing 2 touches a game at best. So there's merit to thinking that we saw the snaps get closer to 65-35 last week, that this could be a 50-50 snap split if indeed the Chargers get up by 14 pretty early, as Vegas is kind of projecting here. So I think Eckler's a fine play. He's going to grade out in any model and projections really well against this just overall team, it being a huge favorite. But I think Justin Jackson, I think there's merit for him potentially seeing even more snaps, definitely because they're going to get ahead. But if you do have Gordon coming back, he's pretty much a talented running back that's not going to be used on this team. They might feed him a couple more touches and kind of scheme it that way. So I lean Keenan Allen because of that a little bit, but also Keenan Allen just been fantastic. 42 targets you touched on, leader in air yards. He's going to avoid Xavier Howard because he'll move into the slot a lot. Howard will stay on the outside with Williams. And then also slot cornerback right now. Keenan Allen just getting everything pushed his way in terms of everything being favorable. This matchup, and now slot cornerback Jamal Wiltz for the Dolphins is going to miss week 4. He's likely to miss, they're saying. You saw Keenan Allen last week get to go up against the backup cornerback in the slot and for most of that game, and that didn't turn out well. So, yeah, Keenan Allen's the chalkiest player on the slate right now. When it comes to like lineup construction, getting to like Keenan Allen and Gallman, just be careful with how much you're getting to. You can play chalk in the NFL. Like Spags was saying earlier, you just need to find 1 or 2 pivot spots. So this is another fantastic spot for Keenan Allen in all regards. So I think getting to Chargers stacks here to get a little bit different from a lot of the chalk is fine. You want to get to Eckler and Allen. If I had to pick one, I would pick Keenan Allen.
Yeah, it seems fair. And we saw what Amari Cooper did too last week, where, I mean, he had the big day and he is the wide receiver one there. And it's certainly the workload didn't drop off a cliff, even though, again, that one was competitive a little bit longer than one might think. He still did get the opportunity as a wide receiver one. And the target load for Allen is just so high. I think it's certainly a guy who you want to have a good chunk of just because we saw his tournament breaking upside. I mean, that's to see over 40 fantasy points from a guy at wide receiver. We happen to have 2 of them last week because I think Evans over that threshold too. It's a scary spot to not be on there. So even though like a guy like Mike Williams at just 2% projected ownership for him right now could certainly break a few big plays, can certainly be a guy in a few lineups that you have where you don't have Keenan Allen. I think that's sort of a move, but I think that's a fair stance there on Allen because you just gotta have him in there. It's scary to not have him and see him go off against a team where it's so obvious. Like you can get too cute sometimes when you're building lineups, and that could be the case if you don't have Keenan Allen. One note about Justin Jackson too, which I think is also your points about him are really well founded. Getting 4.8 yards after contact so far, and he's seeing much less touches than Eckler, but Eckler only at 3.1. And a lot of the game film watcher guys who I follow have said these guys pretty much look like the same player out there. So as Sal mentioned, if there is a 50-50 split, you could see a lot of volume going to Jackson or a lot of value and upside going to Jackson where he could do probably the same amount, if not more, with more touches or with less touches because he's a bigger bodied guy who's been really good at avoiding tackles. And that's Miami's not a good tackling team. That may shock you to learn. And Justin Jackson can certainly initiate that content and cause issues.
Yeah, Justin Jackson, he's also had 2 rushing touchdowns called back. So I think you're getting a pretty decent discount on his price right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. How about Miami? Because I know a guy that obviously as a stack, you're not going to go here. Probably not going to load up on the Miami Dolphins in general, but the Chargers defense has been weak in the secondary, not quite as good so far this year with a lot of guys banged up and out of games. And Miami throwing a lot, even though they're not throwing well, they are throwing a lot and throwing deep downfield. Devontae Parker, one of the leaders in the league in air yards, getting 21.4 air yards per target, has seen a good amount of targets as well, hasn't paid them off at all with a terrible catch rate. Preston Williams, also a guy who was in the Millionaire Maker winning lineup a couple weeks ago. Any Miami Dolphins at all of interest to you, given how bad the Chargers have been?
Yeah, Preston Williams for sure. He saw 20 targets last 2 weeks. He's going to get Josh Rosen again behind center. And honestly, Rosen, the stat sheet looks bad, but he had a lot of drops. Preston Williams dropped an end zone touchdown. He had it for 2 steps and then it slips out at the end, something that could have probably been reviewed, but wasn't. So Josh Rosen, that's his main target since camp, since the preseason. They worked a lot together on the second unit. So 12 targets last week. He was on the field for 68% of the snaps week 2, only in the high 20s week 1, and then 96% of the snaps last week. And he's likely to avoid Casey Hayward. So right now, Casey Hayward missed practice on Wednesday. We'll see if that actually means anything. A lot of the times guys will miss on Wednesday, sort of just a day off to get healthier. We'll see what happens today. But Casey Hayward, I would imagine, would be on Devontae Parker. You're going to have Desmond King, the best slot cornerback in the league, on Jakeem Grant in the slot. And then you're going to have Preston Williams against a backup cornerback where there's already 2 safeties down in Derwin James and Adrian Phillips in the secondary for the Chargers. I think Preston Williams, again, is in line for double-digit targets, and it's just a matter of last week he had, I think, 2 drops. It's just a matter of if he can put the whole game together. But a really talented kid, and I think the price point's good. And in all forms of DFS, any sport, getting on rookies, I mean, if you did it in any NBA with a Trae Young or a Luka Doncic, getting on them early before their price point creeps up is important. I think Preston Williams is probably a 5K receiver by midseason. And the game script is just going to keep saying pass the ball. So, yeah, I like Preston Williams if you're running back stacks or even as a one-off as probably like the cheapest at wide receiver I would go in a tournament.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thought. I mean, almost 8 targets per game for Preston Williams, as you mentioned. A guy who's probably due for some better luck. Only a 47% catch rate, which one would think will trickle up, especially with Josh Rosen in there being theoretically a little more conservative passer than Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's not a bad spot, and certainly if you are going to stack up Chargers, Osmo does tend to recommend that you run it back with the guy, and I think Williams or again Devontae Parker, who has had less of that connection with the quarterbacks. One of those guys could be valuable at next to no ownership, under 2% for both those guys. The Chargers defense, any interest at all for you? Because you are getting that Miami offense, I guess, premium tax that you're paying for all the defenses going against them. Would they be somebody you'd want to go to at all?
I mean, they're viable. So, like, the thing with paying up at defense, we talked about the Patriots a little bit. It's always fine, especially probably more so in tournaments than cash, just because it is variant. But like week 1, you had Miami playing Baltimore. Baltimore's defense scored 11 points. Then we know that last week you had just a total eruptions, or 2 weeks ago, total eruption spot for the Patriots against Miami. It's so variant, so I just opt not to pay all the way up for them. But if you're going to do it, a tournament would be this place to do it. I would rather have more money for a cash lineup.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we saw last week, there were a lot of people, Josh and I talked about it on Live Before Lock on Sunday, where there are people in the chat like, oh, they're trying to talk you off the Dallas defense, play them. Like, they're $4,300. Like, you could upgrade position players by a decent amount if you go down to the Saints ended up having a good week. Certainly a bit spotty with a punt return touchdown and a fumble return touchdown, but that's what football is. Defense is very variant. So I'm less inclined as well to pay up at defense.
You had the Jets at like 2,100 scoring 2 defensive and special teams touchdowns. It's who scores a defensive touchdown, and that's so variant.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the Jets. You would have guessed that going against the Patriots, but yeah, that's how it happens. So, save your money if you can. And certainly in cash if you feel like really confident in defense. I played the Patriots defense a lot at that price point, but that's a different situation. They generate turnovers, they generate sacks. Like, if you want to pay up for a defense, pay up for one that's generating a good amount of pressure. This year, the Chargers are not that team, I think, is what we've seen so far. We got in a game here with Carolina heading into Houston. Carolina getting 21.8 implied points, so a bit of a drop there for their QB Kyle Allen in his second start of this year. Houston getting 25.8 implied points on the other side. Perhaps some sneaky shootout potential here because Carolina is playing at a very fast pace this year, just behind the Cardinals at 23.9 seconds per snap. And that is it seems like a deliberate choice, not a symptom of their being behind or whatever, as that might be the case where the pace drives up. These guys are snapping the ball fast. Kyle Allen looked pretty accurate in his start, a 71% completion rate. Christian McCaffrey looked rejuvenated. Greg Olsen certainly hit the fountain of youth in that game as well. He's been highly targeted all year, but Kyle Allen looked for him a lot. How are you feeling about Kyle Allen? Because he's got no buzz here. He's not getting that Daniel Jones buzz, which seemed like he might have. And I think Jones kind of stole his thunder in that late game window. But Allen looked good, and he's in a better offense at a cheap price. How do you feel about Carolina?
Yeah, the price point on Allen's favorable. Right now, Houston's secondary is really bad. But I think just because you have Jones and a lot of other, and maybe even Case Keenum, I think there's more viable, cheaper quarterbacks, like if you're just trying to get value there. So I'm not going to get to Allen, but in terms of like the rest of the passing game, yeah, I think Curtis Samuel's in a fantastic spot here. He saw 7 targets last week from Kyle Allen. He has a favorable price point. Right now, he's like a fringe wide receiver for me in GPPs, but he probably ends up making a player pool. He's 8th in routes run this year at 121. And the matchup against this Houston secondary is great. Like, Houston's D-backs are some of the slowest in the league. You have really speedy wide receivers in Samuel and DJ Moore. I just prefer Curtis Samuel personally. It seemed like an early connection just this week or last week, and also last year when they hooked up. DJ Moore only 2 targets last week. And then, yeah, you mentioned Greg Olsen. He looks fantastic. 36.4% of red zone targets for this Carolina team is going to him. He's third in tight end air yards. Right now, he ranks out as my tight end 5 on the week. So he'll make a player pool for sure. Third in routes run for tight ends with 102. Yeah, everything looks really good for Olsen. I just don't want to stack this team because I don't want to get to Kyle Allen. But if you do want to run it back with the other side of this game, I think that Olsen and Samuel are fine. And then obviously Christian McCaffrey on a week where you don't have any of the stud running backs, he's definitely in play. He's extremely viable. The Texans on the interior are pretty good against the run. DJ Reader is like one of the best in the league right now, but everywhere else they're pretty shallow. They have good edge rushers in Mercilus and JJ Watt, of course, but everywhere else they're pretty shallow against the run. We know McCaffrey, what he can do in the passing game as well. He already has 12 red zone attempts this year, which is crazy. Something that's a little bit worrisome. He faces an 8-man box on 24% of his snaps, but for a guy that's going to get to the outside a lot and be used in the passing game, it kind of neutralizes that for me. So, yeah, McCaffrey's, in my opinion, the best play probably in this entire game on this team, but that shouldn't surprise anybody. And I do think Curtis Samuel is GPP viable.
Yeah, McCaffrey's a guy I love every single week, but getting 25 touches per game, which is not a benchmark you're seeing from a lot of running backs in these days, and including 7 targets per game, going against the Houston defense, who we saw got strafed by Alvin Kamara a few weeks ago. And I do think those guys tend to be reasonable comps, even though it didn't pay off for Kamara against the Rams. I do think generally those guys are going to have similar results because they're used in similar ways and have kind of similar explosiveness and elusiveness. But yeah, Houston giving up over 5.4 yards per rush, also giving up a lot of catches to running backs. On DVOA, they're not a terrible defense against pass catching running backs, but overall they have given up that production. McCaffrey to me is a guy who I want in lineups every week. If he's chalk, I don't care because he has gigantic upside at the position and you can find ways to get to him. We've talked about some of the value guys out there. I think you just have to get to McCaffrey. But, just looking at this team, though, like it does seem like a team stack situation where you have a lot of guys getting a good amount of targets and a Houston team who can score on the other side. So I don't know. I think it's interesting, but I agree with Kyle Weir's take on Kyle Allen, where he's not a guy I'm dying to get to. But if all these weapons look interesting and the quarterback is going to be lower owned, that is one spot where it tends to be a situation where you can go to the quarterback.
Yeah, I think that there's some people in chat saying that they want to fade McCaffrey, which is totally fine. And if you do, in terms of just getting some sort of leverage, I think the best spot to eat chalk is like the guys, like you said, 25 touch, high upside running backs. But if you do want something to build off of like fading a McCaffrey, Trey Turner, the right guard right now, is in the concussion protocol. So that's going to lead to just another lineman down for the Panthers. And that's just never great in terms of having run blocking.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we saw, how the Carolina offense can certainly go south if things kind of trickle downwards and look worse. But I just haven't seen enough from Houston. I think they really are feeling the loss of Jadeveon Clowney more than they thought they would because the run defense has fallen off of a cliff, and that was one of their strengths last year. Still have J.J. Watt in there who's going to, wreak havoc, and the defense overall not bad. But I think the loss of him has been pretty big, and I'm not afraid to attack the Houston defense right now. And Carolina's playing at pace. Pace is kind of a key thing here in the NFL this year, where we've seen that benefit for a lot of teams. One game we'll talk about later with Seattle and the Cardinals. That's another spot where pace can matter a lot. And speaking of the pace, Houston going to benefit as well because they are kind of going to be getting more of the ball if Carolina's having quick 3-and-out situations or just making more time available to them on the clock. And Houston, not the best success so far this year, but Deshaun Watson has been a slate breaker before. DeAndre Hopkins still seeing a good amount of volume. The pass volume overall has been a little bit lower for Watson this year, but Hopkins is there. Fuller is at a reasonable price. We know his slate breaking upside does seem like he's getting encroached upon a bit by Kenny Stills and maybe a little bit by Kiki QT, but more so Kenny Stills kind of coming for his role. And last week we saw Jordan Akins getting touchdowns, which is not a thing that occurs a lot. Darren Fells also catching a touchdown, not a thing that occurs a lot. How are you feeling about the Houston pass attack here? Because they seem like they're due for better results overall for the primary receivers, at least.
Yeah, I like always just kind of, it's similar for a couple of quarterbacks and their wide receiver. I'll just always have some lineups with Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins because we just know what these guys can do. I was really hoping Hopkins, with all the Keenan Allen chalk, would come in lower than he is. It's still low ownership for him, but not as low as it would make me take a really strong stand on it. But yeah, Hopkins every single week is fine. This Carolina secondary, though, although they have not played like anything, I would say that's too challenging. Like week 1, Jared Goff had his worst completion percentage, more so because he was just wildly inaccurate than anything. I think that it is pretty strong. I mean, you have James Bradbury, who's one of the better shutdown cornerbacks in the league. You have Dante Jackson, who through 3 weeks has looked really good on the outside. So Fuller for me is kind of just a fade in this game. Kenny Stills, you mentioned, yeah, he's taken over that job from Kiki Kute. Kenny Stills has the best matchup on this team for sure with DeAndre Hopkins having Bradbury against him, but it's just not a spot that I think has enough tournament upside. So I think for me in this game, yeah, get to like one or two or a couple lineups of just the Watson and DeAndre Hopkins stack just between the two of them. It's just so confusing how Duke Johnson's on this team and not being used in the passing game,
Yeah.
especially when you have such a bad offensive line. How is Duke Johnson not having like 6, 7 targets a game, being barely used in the backfield in the receiving game? It's surprising to me. So I think it's just Hopkins here for some lineups. If the ownership comes down later in the week, I'll have a stronger stand on him, but it's not low enough right now for me to want to get a lot of it.
Yeah, the alternate universe where they don't acquire Carlos Hyde could be an interesting one because I took Duke Johnson in the Awesemo Celebrity League with for charity that we're doing and took him in like the 5th round, but that was when there was no Carlos Hyde. He was still on the Chiefs. And yeah, like his value just drops off a cliff. He's only getting 8 touches per game now. Hyde has taken more of the rushing touches. He's also not getting targeted enough. It just seems like Duke, no matter where he goes, people don't appreciate Duke. Maybe it's something that he's doing in practice, but either way, he's not getting enough. But yeah, also worth noting, as Sal mentioned, the Carolina secondary has been covering really well. One of the better graded PFF coverage units overall in the league so far with an 82.4 coverage grade. So maybe not as good of a spot as it may seem despite the pace, but we'll find out because I do think this does have some sneaky shootout potential and the ownership not really there in a meaningful way, but we'll find out. Let's keep it moving. We got Kansas City getting 30.5 implied points against the Detroit Lions. We're getting 24 implied points of their own. So one of the higher combined totals for for week 4 slate. And Patrick Mahomes, or you've seen probably the viral tweet that's gone out there. He only played in the dome once. He hasn't played in the dome in the pros yet. In college, he did once at over 600 yards and I believe 6 touchdowns. Went nuts there. Obviously, he's been amazing on the year, playing outside, playing against tough defenses. Detroit's defense has been solid, has limited opposing QBs to a 55% completion rate, which is one of the better marks in the league, but still giving up decent results. I think Mahomes could be in a smash spot here. I usually don't love to play a ton of Mahomes because I think for tournaments, you're just going to have more value going cheaper, trying to find some other ways there while getting the Chiefs pieces in there. But Mahomes could really break the slate even at his elevated price point. How are you feeling about Mahomes and the Kansas City pass attack, Sal?
Yeah, I love it. And I love when you have just pieces like a Gallman or just other cheaper wide receivers that make it easier to kind of fit in and justify getting to Mahomes. In a tournament, I think it's fine. He's always going to be like the highest owned quarterback on most weeks. But it's not high enough like other positions like Keenan Allen or other running back, wide receiver, tight ends that you have to kind of get away from it. So, yeah, I'll say what I always say is that he's going to come in as the highest projected quarterback in so many people's models, and he has the highest ceiling. I mean, a 300-yard, 3-touchdown week is just expected out of him, and then it's like, what else can you do? So I think it's totally fine to get to Mahomes in this offense. In a dome, like you mentioned, I'm very excited to see this game. You see Darius Slay right now, star, stud, cornerback, whatever you want to say, for the Lions is uncertain for Sunday, which would only make it even better. That's the only guy on this secondary that really poses a chance of shutting down anything on this defense or taking away one of your wide receivers. So they rank right now 12th in Pro Football Focus and pass coverage, but if they lose Slay, they're a well below average secondary. So Mahomes doesn't really matter the matchup anyways. I think he's totally viable at the price tag. Usually in cash, I totally agree like with what you said. In both formats, I usually like to try and get down a quarterback because I think the drop off isn't that far in most weeks. But like the last year, Mahomes is like the exception to that for me. So I always get to some of him, especially in GPPs. I think he's definitely viable this week.
Was Slay, because I didn't see the injury thing and I don't recall if it happened during the game. Slay was on Aguilar most of that game, right? Because I feel like people before when we were doing our shows were like, yeah, Darius Slay is going to shut down Aguilar. I was like, I don't think Darius Slay, I think he's a talented corner, but I don't think he's a shutdown corner by any stretch. Was he on Aguilar for the most of that game? Do you know?
Yeah, he followed Aguilar into the slot a few of it. The numbers that I saw, he wasn't like fully shadowing him, but I actually agree with you. I saw that that like he shadowed Keenan Allen when they played the Chargers,
Right.
and a lot of people were saying that like because he got the interception at the end of the game, a lot of people were just saying that Slay's been a stud through 2 games and looked good. But like when you look at his Pro Football Focus grades and some other plays, he's actually been like pretty poor so far this year. He's still a talented cornerback, the best on that team, but he has not performed as well as like people are hyping him up to have been performing thus far. And yeah, I do think that he got burnt on. I remember at least one play where Aguilar had just beat him.
Yeah, Antoine Murphy in the chat, who's one of the regulars, so I'm not going to razz him too hard. But yeah, Aguilar was a good fade. He just got 2 luck box touchdowns. When you're running that many routes and there's no other targets there, it's not luck. It's the volume. It's just being out there in a pass heavy offense. Like I like routes per game is something where I didn't look at as much until I got to Osmo. And I wish I were looking at it for years because that's the biggest correlation I've seen with receivers, where if guys are just out there running routes and available, Like, that's the thing. And for Aguilar, that was the case for him last week. Might not be the case this week with Jeffrey back in there, but Aguilar's running over 40 routes per game. Like, that's volume. That counts as volume if the target share isn't always there. And I think that sometimes people forget that. But yeah, I think Slay is not a guy to worry about here. How about the lesser receivers here with Hardman and Robinson? I think they kind of are carving out a role for himself. Hardman, another guy, really elite in terms of separation on targets. Also just really good in terms of just speed. He's a fast guy. He's breaking away from players at an elite level. Which of those guys do you prefer here? Because neither's going to be too owned. They're at a similar price point, but they both have the gigantic upside.
Yeah. So Hardman I think has higher upside there, but I think I prefer Robinson to Hardman just because of what you were saying in terms of routes run and overall snap count. You're getting Robinson on the field more for like 25 to 30% more of the snaps. So you're going to get big play upside out of like all of these Chiefs passing game options. But between those two lesser, I would say, owned players, I prefer Robinson over Hardman. And overall in this passing attack, though, I prefer Sammy Watkins the most. Like this guy has been just consistent week in and week out, and people keep saying that like these guys on the outside for the last 2 weeks, Hardman and Robinson, having big games, scoring the touchdowns, but you still have Watkins seeing an average of over 10 targets a game, and he's having decent games, like 5 catches for 60 plus yards is a quality game when everybody else on your team is going off. Like just imagine when Robinson and Hardman each don't catch a long touchdown. Like Watkins coming out of the slot for more than 2/3 of his routes the last 2 weeks. I'm going to keep going back to there. So I have it ranked right now for this passing game: Watkins, Kelsey, Robinson, Hardman for me.
Okay. Yeah, that seems fair. Now, Hardman, certainly a guy is going to be dependent on the big plays, and they could keep being there because this is the Chiefs offense. And did you know that they are averaging 392 yards, passing yards per game right now?
That's crazy. Yeah, when I was on the show with Lofty 2 weeks ago, like I knew that Mahomes threw those 4 touchdowns in the second quarter and he went off, but I think he threw like 280 passing yards in the quarter. Like that is just absolutely absurd.
He's doing things which we didn't think were possible outside of Madden, legitimately, and
Yep.
it's amazing to see. Like I hope it keeps going because we're witnessing something. Bill Simmons was talking about it this week where he was like, "Yeah, Patrick Mahomes is not the greatest quarterback, but he's the most talented quarterback I've ever seen." Because Tom Brady with what he's done, he's certainly the greatest in terms of how we define winning and all that. But Mahomes, in terms of pure talent, every week is just doing things which didn't seem possible. And it seems like the league is trying to follow the roadmap as best they can with their deep targets on the rise across the board. How about Detroit on the other side? Because they do have a good run total here. They're passing more. I think certainly the expectation coming into the year was they would be more of a clock-killing team with Darrell Bevel coming in. Instead, he's kind of embraced the better parts of Matt Stafford, who's got more deep targets, still leading the league in terms of deep targets per game with over 7 per game of 20-plus yards. He's been looking better. Accuracy's been decent. Just he has competent receivers there with Galladay, who had a down week last week, but still had a bunch of targets. And also Marvin Jones, who's been running the same amount of routes as Galladay, not getting the same results overall. How do you feel about the pass attack here? Because they could be playing catch up for a lot of the game.
Yeah, like you mentioned, the big thing here is that they'll be playing catch up. Like this team doesn't want to throw the ball a lot. They want Matthew Stafford to throw like 30 times and want to lean on their run. But if you're going to be trailing by potentially whatever it comes down to against a Chiefs team, it could easily be 2 scores quick. You're going to have a game script where Matthew Stafford more times than not probably has to throw closer to 40 than closer to 30 times. So I do think these guys are in play. I really like Kerryon Johnson this week. It's just scary because he could be quickly phased out of this game if indeed KC does get up and it becomes just a pass-heavy approach. So Kerryon at his price point with a thin running back slate, I still think he's in play for me. KC's dead last this year and since the beginning of last year in Pro Football Focus run defense, and they're giving up the 6th most rushing yards per game at 138 rushing yards per game. We saw last week Kerryon career's highs, 75% of the snaps, career high 20 rushing attempts. I think he's fine. In the passing game, yeah, I'm not going to get to Stafford just because of how deep quarterback is this week. I think there's probably 7 or 8 other quarterbacks I'd rather kind of get stacks with, but the passing game I think is very viable. The secondary for the Chiefs is improved, but I think it's a lot of who they've played, and it's kind of thin. Like Kendall Fuller in the slot is still at best okay. You have Ward on the outside, who at best is okay. Breeland on the outside, journeyman cornerback right now, is looked terrible so far this year. And then the Honey Badger has also looked pretty bad, worse than you're expected from him. So this secondary can be attacked. I think Galladay is the obvious name to kind of run back stacks with. But yeah, we saw Marvin Jones last week run more routes and actually be featured in an offense. But I think a lot of that probably comes down to just design and scheme and really who they were playing. I think more times than not, it's going to be Galladay for consistency. So in this game on the Detroit side, I would rank it Galladay and then Kerryon for really my main interest in where I get to. Danny Amendola has like a fantastic matchup in the slot, but I'll continue to say it like on the show every week. Just like don't play Danny Amendola. Like week 1 was a spot where Amendola had a a fantastic week because it went to overtime and because of like 50 pass attempts Stafford week. But more times than not, Amendola is going to see 4 or 5 targets that are like 5-6 yards down the field. So in terms of upside for GPPs, it's just not there.
Yeah, not going to see the level of pace either that he saw versus Arizona that often either. And we're only running 25 routes per game, which is not as much as you'd want to have, especially compared to Galladay and Jones, who are running about 10 more, a little bit more than 10 more each. But yeah, I think your Kerryon Johnson point's a good one. Like last week, Mark Ingram was one of the guys who I thought would have a strong week, and he ended up really, having an amazing week. But I think the inclination for Detroit is probably going to be to try to run the ball a bit more initially. Won't hold up for long. Kansas City's going to put up points on the other side pretty fast. But if they do commit to the run, Kerryon's going to benefit. He's getting that snap count now. There's not anybody out there who's going to really limit him. TJ Johnson is not going to be CJ Anderson in terms of just getting the snap count. And Paul Perkins, is not a talented guy either. He might be starting over Wayne Gallman this week. So that's one feather in his cap if he were still in the Giants. But besides that, not a great running back in there. So Kerryon could be sneaky this week, either just getting those touchdowns from just them having to get more points on the board, or if they do stay competitive, Kerryon could be a guy who they just turn to over and over again to just bleed a little bit of clock to give them a shot to hang in there. So there's a lot of game scripts that favor Kerryon this week. We are at the home stretch here, guys. So hit the like button, please. Help us keep the lights on by doing that. And of course, also go check out our packages at awesemo.com/join. Again, packages as low as $3.95 a week. It's really cheap here, meant for the casual player. You get grades for ownership and for the projections. So go check it out right now at awesemo.com/join. Use the promo code NFL Strategy for half off your first month of Awesemo Plus if you want to go that route. All right, we got Oakland getting 19.3 implied points in a matchup against Indianapolis, who's getting 26.3 of their own. Last week, Darren Waller was not a slate breaker per se because there were some big tight end performances, but certainly a guy who did a lot despite not getting a touchdown. Really getting highly targeted. His target share is up to 30% now for Oakland, kind of being used similarly to Jared Cook was last year, except he's more of an intermediate target, more of a short range guy, but just getting the safety blanket treatment over and over again. People also have talked about Josh Jacobs a little bit, not much in the way of ownership for him, but still a guy who has seen decent volume. Sal, how are you feeling about this Oakland pass attack? Or I guess the overall offense. Anybody here jumping out to you as being interesting?
Yeah, the only guy I have written down for my notes right here is just Darren Waller. There's so much to say about how good this kid looks in this offense. So I mentioned earlier that Evan Ingram was like 1A, 1B right now with another tight end, and that's Darren Waller right now for this week. So Indy is his own defense that allows the tight ends to catch the ball, especially in the middle of the field and short, and even in the red zone. We saw Austin Hooper take advantage of that last week. We saw Delaney Walker. Both of those guys just coincidentally scored 2 touchdowns each, but they want you to throw the ball to the running back and to the tight end. Jalen Richard's on this team in the backfield, but they haven't been using him all that much in the receiving game. Darren Waller stands just the best chance here against his zone defense. Right now, he's second in targets, just behind Evan Ingram by 1 target with 29. First in receptions, third in overall yards for tight ends. He hasn't scored a touchdown this week, which is surely coming just based on the amount of time that he's on the field and running routes. Over 95% of the routes or snaps so far each and every week. Carr has 105 passer rating when he's targeting him. That is very, very good for a specific receiver. He's getting a ton of air yards. And to make things even better, Darius Leonard, the star, I guess you can say, linebacker for the Colts, right now is still in the concussion protocol after missing last week. That just makes it even thinner in the middle of the field for Darren Waller. So he's the only guy I've written down for Oakland. I don't want to get cute and really kind of go anywhere else in the receiving game. Josh Jacobs, I have my own concerns about just based on his usage. But for right now, for me, I think when you factor in ownership being a third less than Evan Ingram, I think Darren Waller's, for me, probably the best tight end play in either format.
In Indianapolis' defense, the staple both last year and this year, they're only giving up 7 air yards per target. They try to keep the ball in front of them, which means they might just be willing to give Waller that 15 catches or whatever that he can do that they just want to do on both sides. So it might be a situation where there's the handshake meme of meeting in the middle of just giving Darren Waller a shitload of targets. I think it could be the situation because he's a short range target and they love giving up short range targets. One thing jumping out to me too, Josh Jacobs, one of the better guys in terms of red zone carries right now with 3.7 red zone rushes per game and also getting 4 yards after contact. So that's kind of surprised me. I didn't know those numbers were there. Indianapolis's run defense hasn't been that good to start the year, 5.2 yards per rush. Not a spot where I'd want a game stack because I just don't believe in the Oakland offense that much. But I do think Waller and Jacobs, not much ownership on Jacobs, a little bit on Waller. Waller is certainly a pivot to Ingram that's, with the high ownership going to him. And Jacobs just a guy who could be a pivot to our pal Wayne Gallman at his price point and no ownership all expected on him, I think. Could be interesting. How about Indianapolis on the other side? T.Y. Hilton still questionable. I haven't seen his practice status so far in the last few days, but that would be a big loss to him and maybe a spot that could open up some opportunity. But it seems like if he were out, that would be a spot where Marlon Mack would get leaned on even more, even though the Oakland run defense has been their best part. Pass defense looking bad for them. How are you feeling about Indianapolis here going against Oakland?
Yeah, you mentioned Ty. So yesterday he did not participate. Nothing so far yet today, but it seems like from all the beat writer reports and how this injury was aggravated that he's probably doubtful for this week. So
Mhm.
that leads me to have just no interest in Brissett. It leads me to not have much interest in the passing game, but loads of interest in Marlon Mack for me. A slight favorite, but he's at home as a running back. That's always great. He leads the league in rush attempts at 61. Last week in a game where he was probably banged up, came in limited, saw 18 total touches, over 80 yards and a touchdown. He's 17th, which doesn't sound like a good number, but relative to his team, he's 17th in routes run with 57 as a running back, which for him is actually a lot relative to what he's been doing the last few years. But Nyheim Hines is 45th with 32. So that was like a concern. Is Nyheim Hines going to force him off the field on third downs? That has not been happening often. Oakland right now on Pro Football Focus ranks 30th in rush defense. I like this spot for Marlon Mack. I think the price point is too cheap, and I think he's one of the better plays just based on his price positionality on this slate where there's not a lot of running backs. So, Marlon Mack's the main option here. Malik Hooker, it's also worth mentioning, he's out or he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks, which once again, that's just another option in the middle of the field that helps Darren Waller.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Marlon Mack and in this spot here if Hilton is going to be out because, you have guys like Paris Campbell, Deion Kane, the much touted preseason guy who has done nothing so far since getting a little more routes in his way. Zach Pascal, who has moments of usefulness, but still not a guy who's going to see a heavy target volume, one would think. It seems like a spot to me where it doesn't take a lot to beat Oakland, at least on paper. I think you just keep it close to the vest, and Marlon Mack could be the beneficiary. He's running it over 20 times per game, which is a lot. And as Sal mentioned, the targets or the routes run could see an increase in targets at some point. So Marlon Mack could be a sneaky play at under 10% ownership, it looks like industry wide. We got Cleveland heading into a matchup with Baltimore. Cleveland getting 19 implied points, a really rough team total for Cleveland. Baltimore getting 26. They're a 7-point favorite. That seems disrespectful to the AFC North rivalries that we've had, but still, Baltimore's defense, not great so far this year. They have had some injuries to the secondary, which are not the best, obviously, but Cleveland's also just been kind of hapless. I do wonder if this would be a contrarian spot where maybe Cleveland comes through because we kind of assume Baltimore is a good defense, and they really haven't shown it this year, giving up a good amount of yards per pass, 8 yards per pass, 9.7 air yards per target. According to DVOA, not generating a good rush. This is 62 graded pass rush, and also a 58 graded coverage unit. So Baltimore really hampered by injuries so far. Would you have any interest in Cleveland, given that they have disappointed really willfully all year long, and maybe this is a spot where they finally get back on track?
Yeah, so Cleveland side of it, you have to see, like you were saying, Baltimore, if there's no Jimmy Smith again for a third straight game, that's secondary. Those splits without Jimmy Smith are huge. They're already down Tavon Young all year in the slot, so that would be 2 backup cornerbacks on the field. So slight bump for some players, but just no interest in Baker. The way that this offensive line is performing right now, another injury the last time out there, and just right now, Freddie Kitchens' play calling is pretty atrocious. So OBJ, Baker Mayfield, don't have interest in. OBJ, like his 89-yard signature catch against his own defense and just beating everybody is really what's like making him seem like he's having a solid year. But other than that, it's not really on him. It's just the fact that there's not enough time to find him deep, and the routes that Freddie Kitchens is kind of designing are just not favorable. So where I go on the Cleveland side is I think Landry actually has an okay matchup this week in the slot. It's just a matter of like, do you really want to get to Jarvis Landry on a huge main slate when there's so many other cheap wide receivers? And then Nick Chubb, I think, has to be at least somewhat interesting. Baltimore right now is just one of the stout run defenses through 3 weeks, but Chubb's running the 8th most routes for a running back at 77. He played 97% of the snaps last week. And I'll just harp on it that like the running back position right now is very, very thin, in my opinion, this week relative to others. So it makes guys like Nick Chubb, who have, at least from last week, a ton of usage on the field and passing game work, have that much more upside. So I think Chubb is like the main guy that I probably just end up getting to here, but even that's not going to be with high volume.
Yeah, Chubb also getting 5 targets per game, which is a little bit higher than you'd expect for him, along with 19 rushing attempts. And, if it is a traditional AFC North kind of battle, you could theoretically see him being relied on a bit more. But I think Landry is kind of an interesting point because it surprised me to see this, and it's been the case pretty much every week. He's running more routes per game than Odell Beckham is. He's also getting targeted deeper more frequently than Odell Beckham, 2 targets of 20-plus yards per game compared to 1.7, which is a negligible amount, but still noteworthy given that Landry has not shown the upside, whereas Beckham has. I think the pass attack here could be interesting, especially if, as Sal mentioned, if Jimmy Smith is not in there. They just really haven't shown much in terms of pass defense, and they have shown a good amount in terms of rush defense. So I wouldn't sleep entirely on it, just because I think the world is putting dirt on Cleveland now. And I mean, Freddie Kitchens, look, the play calling has been bad when you're defending the critiques, and you have Todd Monken in there and you're not really letting him do the kind of inventive formations and stuff that he did in Tampa Bay. I think it's a spot where they are due for some positive regression, and maybe it happens here because Baltimore, too, should be scoring. Lamar Jackson's been looking good, been throwing it deep and doing pretty much everything you'd ask him to see. Not the most accurate week versus Kansas City, but also didn't make the colossal bonehead mistakes that you're afraid of with him. How about Baltimore for you? Because Mark Andrews, a guy who we've seen a lot of production from. He was hurt last week. One would assume that things will level out a bit for him if he's a little bit closer to healthy this week. And also Mark Ingram had that monster week last week, and Cleveland's been pretty bad across the board. I guess the run defense scored in PFF isn't that bad, but production-wise, they have given up some stuff. How are you feeling about the Baltimore offense?
Yeah, so Baltimore is going to come down to really what this Cleveland defense looks like come Sunday. So yesterday, or I guess against the Rams, they had 4 starting defensive backs out, which is why the Rams, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks both go for 100 yards and look fantastic. If you're going to have Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward miss practice on Wednesday, if Denzel Ward's the main guy, right, stud cornerback for them, but if they lose Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams, if Demarius Randall's out again, if like half of those guys are out and really hitting on Denzel Ward, then I'm going to have more interest in Baltimore. It's going to come with elevated interest in Lamar Jackson, who just seems to be a very high floor. Even last week when his passing game wasn't there, he still got it going on the ground to keep himself at least stable. But Marquise Brown right now for me is like a wait and see on what happens with Denzel Ward. If Denzel Ward is out, Marquise Brown becomes a lot better of a play. Week 1 was the big thing with Hollywood Brown was, he's not seeing snaps. Now he's seeing 9 targets per game through 3 weeks with a 41% target share of air yards. So yeah, if Denzel Ward is out, Marquise Brown's interest, I would say, becomes more of like a priority of getting him into lineups because we saw last week just the Rams left and right were being able to do whatever they want with all 3 of their receivers against this Cleveland secondary. You said Mark Andrews, yeah, he came in limited last week. It's just tough for me to want to get to Andrews when you just have such a mispriced Aaron Waller in a really good matchup. And I know, like, if you're talking about cash, ownership doesn't matter for even Evan Ingram. So wanting to get to Mark Andrews there against the Cleveland defense that like 2-3 years ago, they were the team that Arizona is right now, just target them against tight ends. But since like the midway point of last year, have been very hard on tight ends. So it's really just wait and see on what happens with this defense to see if I want to get to any Lamar and most importantly, Hollywood Brown.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And certainly a case where you want to watch the news for that. Tune into the shows that we'll have the strategy shows. We'll have more on that as the week goes on. But yeah, I think there's just opportunity in this game. And I think it's one, the ownership not quite there. Nobody really projected for much ownership outside of Mark Andrews and a little bit for Odell. So could be a game where if it's not, I think the divisional games, there is sort of a popular thing that I see pop up a lot in our streams and the chats where people are like, yeah, it's a divisional game. It's going to be, a slugfest. That is the case sometimes, but it is not always the case. As we saw, even Jacksonville, Tennessee, Jacksonville put up a lot of yards in that Thursday night game, a lot of points as well. And those are 2 teams who actually are defensive heavy teams. So I think, that is sort of I wouldn't say an old wives' tale, but one of those things that we kind of hold near dear to our hearts that is not always the case. And these defenses so far have not shown enough to limit anybody.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'll mention is that for Baltimore, that I'm probably somebody coming into the year and even through the first week or 2 that was low on Mark Ingram. But looking at what he's been doing, he's on this slate, and I think leading the league. I didn't look at the Thursday night slate, but I would imagine leading the league in success rate, which just means how effective you are on picking up a certain amount of yards on first down, second down, and third down. He has a 63% success rate, which is like an elite number right now. And yeah, his offensive line right now is averaging a league low 9% stuff percentage. So Mark Ingram is like week in and week out a serious play. Week 1 was a blowout, so he kind of came off the field. Snap percentages were all thrown off. He's seeing about 60 to 65% of the snaps each week, but when he's on the field, he's touching the ball like 16 to 18 times. So a difficult matchup, maybe based on Pro Football Focus with Cleveland. But Mark Ingram, he's just having so much success this year that he has to be in play.
Yeah, 4.3 yards after contact for Ingram, which is one of the better marks for a running back receiving that sort of volume. That's like Dalvin Cook territory. And also 3.7 red zone rushes per game, which can certainly pay off in a spot where, Cleveland can certainly give up some red zone looks. So Ingram's a guy not to sleep on. I think we have kind of slept on him a lot for the most part, but he's a guy who has a lot of potential. This game, perhaps less potential. Tennessee getting 21 implied points going into Atlanta with 25 implied points for them. Tennessee, if anybody's due for a dead cat bounce, it is Tennessee after that brutal Thursday night performance against Jacksonville. And Atlanta's defense has been decent in terms of results on the year, but still not anything special overall. Generating a decent rush with a 72 coverage, or a 78 pass rush grade from PFF, but not getting results in terms of sacks yet, just a 5% sack rate. Mariota, look, if Mariota's ever going to be useful, I feel like this is the week after he was just really emasculated in that Thursday performance. Not going to see a ton of volume, though, in terms of pass attempts, most likely. But, a dude who just seems like he's due for better days. Any interest at all in Tennessee in this, bounce back, quote unquote, spot?
So, like, the two guys I've written down are Derrick Henry and Delaney Walker, but it's just a tough week for me to want to prioritize Henry. He's seventh in the league in attempts, 17 per game. He's actually seeing 2.3 targets per game. So when you're having 19 opportunities a game, you're definitely in play, but not the spot that I want to target him. I like to target him when he's like a home favorite because he just doesn't have as much upside in the receiving game, especially on a slate where we talked about Marlon Mack, how good of a spot it is for him as a home favorite. We just talked about Mark Ingram, how good of a spot it is for him relative to like a Derrick Henry. So he's probably a guy that, sure, he has upside in terms of opportunities, but just relative to these other guys in hindsight, he's not in that great of a spot. So I don't know if I get there overall. He only ranks 33rd in terms of his breakaway percentage. So what that means is like his opportunities. Sure, we saw his breakaway percentage on that screen pass, but in terms of on the ground, his opportunities are really just coming from shorter chunks that don't have as much big play upside. And Atlanta's run defense has actually been solid. You target them with a pass catching running back for the past 3 or 4 years, and that's kind of what Dion Lewis, who's been on the field for actually 50% of the snaps, sees more of a bill there. Derrick Henry also third highest mark on the slate at 29% of his carries facing an 8-man box. So I'm not going to get to as much Henry. Delaney Walker right now comes in for me as like a tight end number 4. I have him at right ahead of Greg Olsen for this slate. He's just been really good. I mean, he's high 70s in PFF grades, 7 targets per game, and he's the main target that Mariota is going to look at in the red zone and in just the middle of the field in general. He grades out well outside of the other 3 tight ends we've talked about in terms of Kelsey, Ingram, and Waller, who 2 of those guys are just too cheap. Then I probably get to then I get to Walker. So not much here that I really want to prioritize. Just not going to get to Henry because of other guys around him. And same can be said probably for Walker.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on most of those takes. Walker just seems a little overpriced to me. Like, I get he's got 7 targets a game, and he is a popular target for Mariota, but at his price point, you'd rather find the money to go to any of the other tight ends we talked about. I'd rather go to Andrews. I'd rather go to Waller. I'd rather find the money to go to Ingram. I don't think Walker has the upside of those guys, but he is sort of the most targeted guy for Marcus Mariota and has been for a while now. So, I think he could have some theoretical value, but it's hard at that price point to justify going to him. How about Atlanta? Because Tennessee's defense, I do think, is actually pretty good, even though they did get kind of killed by Gardner Minshew. And really, maybe that's a Minshew thing. Atlanta's had some struggles this year. Matt Ryan's had success, but he's also been really bad when pressured. Not a great pass rush thus far for Tennessee, but pressure has really killed Matt Ryan, drops his QB rating off of a cliff. That said, though, still a spot where, as we've seen before, Matt Ryan stacks can get there because he's just getting a ton of volume, over 40 pass attempts per game for him. How are you feeling about Atlanta? And is there anybody you trust? Or I feel like for me, it's pretty much Julio, but that's about it.
Yeah, so I would say 2 spots here. Julio for sure, and then Ridley is what I'm looking at. Again, though, for Ridley, like he's too cheap, but so many cheap wide receivers on the slate. What I would say is Tennessee's defense is definitely good. Their front is good. Slot cornerback Logan Ryan is very good. So you have Sanu kind of being isolated out of this game for me, and in just tournaments in general usually is. But Julio is going to get to go up against Adore Jackson, who right now looks very meh. Like last year had a bad year, looks a little bit better this year, but it's still Julio, a guy who's not getting as much ownership as I think he deserves because Keenan Allen's pulling a lot of that away. So I think just for GPPs, I'm going to get to more Julio and try to prioritize him a little bit more. And then on the other side of this, Calvin Ridley's always going to have benefits from Julio being double teamed, but Calvin Ridley's going to get Malcolm Butler, who has just been atrocious so far this year. So if Ridley's going to favor from one-on-one coverage with Malcolm Butler, there's going to be some upside there for a guy who, in my opinion, is too cheap. Devonta Freeman, people are going to look at it and go, oh, look, he got 90% of the snaps last week. He's back. But Ito Smith got hurt on the first drive with a concussion. Monitor that. Either way, though, Devonta Freeman, he's looked bad up until last week. He looked okay. Most of his yards came from 2 25-yard runs, which is good that he was able to have that sort of burst. But this is a pretty tough run defense. So it's really just Julio and Ridley. Julio more so as like a pivot off of the Keenan Allen and GPPs. Ridley, I think, is actually in a really good spot here. It's just a matter of how you prioritize those cheap wide receivers because he's right there next to a guy like McLaurin.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the, it is still a target share there for Ridley when you have Julio running the same routes. And also Austin Hooper has been targeted quite a bit this year, up to 7.3 targets per game and also running a good amount of routes. So, Ridley, a little bit tough to trust, but certainly a GPP play we've seen the upside from. And dirt cutter offenses have generally given a lot of production to wide receiver too. So it's not crazy to go to Ridley this week. Let's keep moving because, boy, these games really take forever to go. Seattle getting 26.5 implied points going against Arizona. Arizona playing them has been the Coors Field of the NFL this year because they are playing at a 21.3 second pace per snap, which is the highest in the league, highest by over 5 seconds compared to the fastest team last year, which were the Rams and the Ravens. And Seattle, to me, we saw what Russell Wilson did last week. Russell Wilson's favors seem like they're going to rise as long as Chris Carson keeps screwing up and keeps fumbling over and over again. But we are going to have ownership for Wilson. We are going to have ownership for Carson. We're also going to have a good amount of ownership for Tyler Lockett, who's really established himself with 9 targets per game so far. Also running a good amount of routes. DK Metcalf still in the mix, going to be much less owned, but running a similar amount of routes and also getting targeted deep, the same amount as Tyler Lockett is. How are you feeling about Seattle here? Because they're going to be chalky, but we've seen the spot be really good versus Arizona all year so far.
Yeah, I really like it. The public knows it too, but if you're going to stack a team in tournaments, especially a game stack, then you can kind of get away from some of that chalk and neutralize it. So right now, Russell Wilson's my number 1 quarterback on my board for this week. He's 3rd in fantasy points per attempt on this slate out of qualifying quarterbacks. He's coming off a career game and he's just running more overall this year. Arizona giving up the 2nd most points on the slate, just barely behind Miami, 30.3 to the quarterback, Miami 30.6. So I love Russell Wilson. Tyler Lockett's in a loaded mid-range of wide receiver in the 6K range. I think he's the best one. I think he's way too cheap. He's going to have Tremaine Brock guard him this week, and that's just no matchup at all. 80% of his snaps are going to be out of the slot, over 9 targets a game, and he's 7th in air yards for wide receivers. So Lockett just coming out of the slot's deadly against this team. I think a really good team stack this week is Wilson, Lockett, and Metcalf. Metcalf's routes are just all straight down the left side if you look at it on next-gen stats. He's seeing 18.1 air yards per target, which is the 2nd highest on the slate, and he's getting 36% of the team's air yard targets. So overall, I really like that sort of a stack. I know Will Dissly is going to be sort of a popular play because the tight end versus Arizona so far this year is a thing. He's on the field for 55% of the snaps, but we saw a guy in Mark Andrews go off against this team who sees that many snaps as well. So Dissly definitely in play, but I think there's a really big opportunity cost in getting away from an underpriced Ingram and Waller on this slate to get to Dissly. Nick Vannett just got traded to the Steelers, so that's less snaps out the door as the tight ends as well. So I really like the overall spot for Wilson, Lockett, and then getting to Metcalf and team stacks makes a lot of sense. No interest in Chris Carson. He just seems like he's fumbling his job away.
Yeah, Carson. I still have interest in Carson because it just seems like he's due for some. And as chalk, if you don't have him and he does have that day, I think it could be a little bit worrisome given the pace that we have for Arizona. Like obviously at running back, you can always find somebody else who's going to have a comparably big day. But at his price point, he's going to be 21% owned on DraftKings, which is very high. But still, I think he's in play for me just because of the pace here and the fact that right now it seems like it's darkest before the dawn. And Chris Carson right now, the people who are fans of him right now could not be darker. People, especially who have been season long, could not be feeling worse. And I think that is a time where you could buy in. But yeah, I agree with all your takes. Like I think the Lockett and Metcalf, 2 guys who really have done well on the year, also been getting a lot of pass route volume again. And if Carson fails in particular, I think you're going to see more benefit for those guys and for Russell Wilson. And Dissly, this has been a spot where tight ends have been smashing Arizona over and over again. Dissly does stand to have more snaps with no Nick Vannett out there. And when he's been out there and running routes, Dissly's been getting targeted a pretty good amount out overall. It's just he needs to see more snaps. So Dissly certainly a lower price point pivot to those other guys, but a lot of ownership for Seattle, and it seems well deserved. I don't mind them as chalk. How about Arizona on the other side? Because we do have a Seattle defense that is clearly much worse than it has been in previous years. The run defense still looks decent for them, but the pass defense has been bad, giving up a lot of production to guys who it seems like they shouldn't be giving up production to. How are you feeling about the Arizona attack and the highly targeted Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk, both guys over 10 targets per game?
Yeah, this is great. So those are like the 2 guys that I would prioritize. I think this is a really good spot to get to like 5-man game stacks. We do a lot of 4-man, but I think 5-man game stacks are viable here. So yeah, Larry Fitz, Christian Kirk, and David Johnson, the guys that I have written up here. David Johnson's first in routes run, and this is with him missing like a quarter and a half week 2 with 97. He's first tied with Christian McCaffrey. He's averaging close to 6 targets a game. He's only getting stuffed on 10% of his carries. So I think David Johnson for a thin running back week is fine. But yeah, I probably lean more so towards the wide receivers. Larry Fitz leads the league in routes run, 150. 10 targets a game, like you mentioned, on the field a ton. He already has 6 red zone targets, which is just crazy. 32% of the team's red zone target share. Larry Fitzgerald is definitely great for both formats. Same can be said for Christian Kirk. It's just a matter of can like Kyler Murray stay composed. He looked good in the first half last week. Second half, it was like one of the worst second halves for a quarterback this year. So I think all those guys are in play. Something to monitor, Demir Bird, who's second in the league in routes run, he didn't practice on Wednesday. I'm not sure if this is anything major, but if he misses, they cut Michael Crabtree. Keyshawn Johnson's going to step into a role of playing like 90% of the snaps on the outside, and he's a talented rookie. So something to watch. I'm not sure if it actually comes to fruition, but yeah, the main things I would rank here for me is Kirk, Larry Fitz, and then David Johnson in terms of my interest in Arizona, but a really good overall game stack environment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Johnson would be the third for me too. I think the passing game is just going to be benefiting more from Seattle because the yards per game are really not there on the ground going against Seattle. Under 4 yards per rush, 3.8, and also the run defense 72 graded by PFF. And I just haven't loved how they've deployed Johnson so far this year, even though he is running more routes, which is sort of what we were hoping for last year. I don't know that he has the upside of some of the other running backs in there, and his price is still high enough where I'm less inclined to go there. But Fitz and Kirk, a lot of upside and probably more things to come for that wide receiver group, at least in terms of opportunity and being out there. Let's keep it going here to try to keep the pace up. Tampa Bay getting 20.3 implied points against the Rams. We're getting 29.3. Tampa Bay, obviously, the story of last week was the big day for Mike Evans. This week, to me, seems more like a Chris Godwin week. But Sal, how are you feeling here about the prospect of the pass game for Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I mean, like the overall, there's so many playmakers on this team, but I'm just not getting too much of it on this slate. I do prefer Chris Godwin to Evans. He popped up on the injury report yesterday with, I think, a hip injury, so just keep an eye on that. Godwin probably, though, comes in with the toughest matchup maybe out of the slot against the Rams. Mike Evans will also have a tough matchup. Marcus Peters looks good. Honestly, Brashad Perriman has the best matchup against Aqib Talib on the outside, but I don't want to get to that. So really on a slate where there's a lot of wide receivers, it's probably a wash. I would, if I had to pick one player from this team, get to the most Chris Godwin. I'll probably have a few lineups with him, but I'm just not going to prioritize Tampa this week.
Yeah, it just seemed like last week was Mike Evans going against pretty much nobody out there on his deep throws, or his deep targets. 17.18 yards or air yards per target for Evans, and I just don't see the Rams giving up that much. Like they've really limited teams well this year, giving up just over 5 yards per pass, which is a good sign for the Rams defense, possibly helping balance out the offense. The offense, though, could be in a smash spot. The run defense for Tampa Bay look really good, as we saw with Daniel Jones last week, and also Jared Goff in a home game where he has played better. This could be a spot again where we see the Rams passing offense thrive. How are you feeling about Cooper Kupp? Can he follow up that big game, or would you go to a guy like Cooks or Woods? Cooks the big play upside. Woods also an intermediate target who could do damage.
Yeah, I think Cup's the guy that I would get to first in either format, even if the ownership is higher and the price has now come up. But I still think it's a little bit too cheap. You mentioned Goff's at home, which is a good spot for him. He ranks right now as my quarterback 4 for this week. Yeah, Tampa Bay's defensive front just looks fantastic with Vita Vea. No interest in the backfield. Todd Gurley's burst, who is a guy who I try to be a truther for 2 weeks and have some faith. It does not look good turning upfield for Todd Gurley right now. So, yeah, the passing game seems to have a really nice matchup here against Tampa, bottom 10 per Pro Football Focus. I would rank it as I have the first 2 weeks for GPPs, Cups, Cooks, and then Woods, but it's not like by wide margins or putting any slight to Woods. Woods is still being targeted. He's just not the primary guy running out of the slot like Cup is and getting as much red zone usage. And then Cooks on the outside just has a fantastic opportunity in GPPs to kind of win a slate. So I think all three of them are definitely viable. Once again, I would rank it or I would rank it Cup, Cooks, and Woods in GPPs. In cash, I would rank it Cup, Woods, and then Cook.
Yeah, I think that's where I would shake out too. And I'm going to assume no Todd Gurley interest, given the fact that we have seen the Tampa Bay run defense kind of oppress a lot of people in a meaningful way, giving up just 3.0 yards per rush. Wow, that's even lower than I thought. And Gurley, the volume hasn't been there. Would it be somebody you would consider going to as maybe a very, very contrarian tournament play?
No, I mean, I was like week 1, I had a good amount of Todd Gurley because I just wasn't buying that he was going to just fall off the face of the earth. And I thought week 1 was the best week to get him healthy. But he really has not looked good. Like week 1, and there was like one run in the fourth quarter where he looked explosive. But all of last week, they even gave him more snaps, 74%. So he's on the field more. He just wasn't explosive. I think this is a concern for their passing game because they use a lot of play action. So we'll see how that kind of unfolds throughout the year. A team that is favored to go back to the playoffs and compete, but no real interest against this defensive front and just the overall lack of upside I think Todd Gurley has now.
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach and probably one that I would agree with too, because it sucks because like it's a limited sample size and maybe the knee maybe he just needs to get into better condition because he didn't get to see a ton of work in the preseason either. But this spot versus Tampa Bay really has the run defense under Todd Bowles seems like it's made a lot of strides. The defense overall does look better, but the passing to the secondary is still really giving up a lot. The run defense though might be the one spot where I think it might be a stay away situation for me, at least until I see somebody beat that in a meaningful way. Let's keep going. We got Jacksonville heading into Denver. Jacksonville getting 17.8 implied points. Denver getting 21.3 implied points. The only meaningful ownership piece here looks like it'll be Leonard Fournette, who is going to be pretty decently owned again, it looks like, with a solid projection. He's been seeing the volume, 19 touches per game, at a terrible game versus Tennessee, in which a 69-yard run was very nice for him and bailed him out. But overall, a lot of negative runs there. The run blocking line for Jacksonville just looks really bad. Gardner Minshew's been doing a good job, but still the line play is going to be an issue. Denver, though, not generating a rush at all. One of the worst graded pass rushes in PFF. A surprise given that they have Vic Fangio. How are you feeling about Jacksonville? And are you buying this Leonard Fournette ownership, given that it's going to be one of the higher numbers on the slate?
Yes, I mean, since the ownership's coming in like that, just a lot less interest. I understand why. I mean, 100% of the snaps last week, 97% of the snaps week two. He's fourth in routes run for running backs at 84, and it's just a thin running back week, and he has still name value. I think there's more upside for Fournette that's been happening, but his whole entire career he's been an ineffective running back really on a per touch basis. So if the ownership's going to be there, I'm just not going to follow it. Denver's rush defense has looked good through the first 3 weeks of the season. And I think there's just a lot of other viable backs. You have Marlon Mack in a similar price range I like more. You have Mark Ingram, who I probably like more. It's just the fact that Fournette's passing game work has come up. So he has I would say, a slightly higher floor. And we haven't even seen him get touches really in the red zone yet. So once that starts to happen, yeah, I think the prospects for Leonard Fournette will rise based on his usage. So I think the ownership makes some sense, but I think you have better plays to get to overall. I think he's still viable this week. He's the only guy that I really have an interest in on Jacksonville. You're going to have Shark potentially lining up against Chris Harris for a lot of his routes, which isn't great. Dede Westbrook dropped a touchdown so far this year, has not looked great. Going to see targets, but I just think it's a week where I can go elsewhere. Overall, this game seems like sort of a wash for me. Fournette's probably the piece that I would get to, if at all.
Yeah. So people in the YouTube chat, Pablo Elvin saying Fournette is garbage. Fournette, get the FOH. I don't think that is either of those takes I don't agree with. Fournette's been doing the best he can. He's actually done a better job in the pass game, getting 7 targets per game now, also generating 3.3 yards after contact, which is about as much as you can ask given the fact that his run line is going to be one of the worst graded ones in the league with a 47 grade from PFF. It's a very bad run blocking line for Jacksonville. So you can only do so much if your line isn't going to block for you. And it seems like that's been the case for him. So I think he's fine as a play. I wouldn't want him as a chalk play. That ownership comes down, which I would think it will over the next few days. I think he's a little better to go to, but still not a spot where I'm dying for. Denver, any interest at all in any of these guys? Because I really don't see much for me.
Yeah, absolutely no interest. Sutton will get Jalen Ramsey as long as Jalen Ramsey shows up to this game. Sanders is probably going to see Boye. No backfield interest. The only thing on Denver is that Bryce Callahan, he's going to miss 4 more weeks. He's a cornerback, so he was already scheduled to miss, but that's some sort of news. There's just this game in general is kind of gross.
Yeah, I would agree so too. The run game, though, I think is something to watch moving forward. A lot of touches going to the running backs overall. They're running it over 30. They're running it 34 times per game, or rather giving running backs 34 touches per game. And both guys getting targeted. Lindsey was Osmo's sneak play last week, and he had a really nice day against Green Bay. So, Lindsey is a guy in the mix. Freeman's certainly going to take some touches away generally, but they are really committed to the low friction attack, the conservative attack, and that could benefit them moving forward, even if it doesn't this week against Jacksonville. Now our last game on the slate, Minnesota getting 17.8 implied points against Chicago, is getting 20.3 of their own. We saw the bounce back week for Mitchell Trubisky, some increased success there, but this has been 2 defenses who've been really solid. Chicago's defense in particular, really good. Also really good versus the rush, so it could be a tough spot for Dalvin Cook, but one in which he's seen really big volume, getting 19 rush attempts per game, looking really good, getting over 4 yards after contact, also getting the red zone looks, really just a violent runner in a way. Like, I love running backs like that who really cause that car accident kind of contact. How are you feeling about Dalvin Cook here? Because his ownership is down again, and he is a price point pivot to Austin Eckler.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's a price point pivot, like you said, to Eckler. He would be sort of like a contrarian play in that regard. His matchup is like the reason why this slate becomes very thin. If he's playing a league average or even a below average running back defense or rushing defense, it's a really great spot for him and McCaffrey, and then it makes the slate a little bit more concentrated and easier to get running back plays. But the matchup is just too bad. I'm probably not going to get there. I think I agree with the ownership. Right now, through 3 weeks, 68 yards per game is what you're getting given up from this Bears defense. They rank top 5. Last year was the same thing. They just look stout. This defensive front is like scary whether they're rushing a passer, they're just shot out of cannons like on every single play. It's insane the rotations of these guys. You also have Josh Klein, who's a guard for Minnesota. He's in the concussion protocol, so you have to monitor that. That doesn't make it any better for this Minnesota offensive line if they're missing a starting lineman against this probably top of the line defensive line if I had to kind of rate it. So yeah, right now, Dalvin Cook, obviously a great talent. You mentioned all the numbers in terms of after contact, his breakaway percentage, but I don't think it's great. I think he'll probably face an 8-man box like he has been all year, around 30% of the time. And if he's going to face that against just players all across the board for Bears that are just stout, it's probably a stay away spot for me. I think the ownership makes sense.
Yeah, I think this could be a spot, and I've been very down on the Minnesota pass attack, but I do think they could end up passing a bit more here, just because I think it's going to be hard for Dalvin to find room to operate, no matter how good he's been. And the volume is still a thing, where if the game stays close, he could just keep seeing those 3 yards and a cloud of dust kind of runs. But maybe a spot here with Chicago, we saw in the down the stretch in that game versus Washington. Case Keenum was able to move the ball, certainly got harassed in the beginning and gave up all those turnovers, but Cousins has been well protected on the year for the most part. Their pass blocking for Minnesota has been decent, and Cousins not a guy who takes a ton of sacks, so maybe that's a spot where it gets going. But it does seem like a stay away from that for that offense. How about Chicago? Any interest at all in these guys? Because Minnesota's defense has been good on the year, but maybe not as good as it seems. They have given up a 72% completion rate. Some other flaws there. Any interest at all in these guys?
Just Allen Robinson, I'll continue to have interest in. It's an okay spot for him, especially if he starts to go back into the slot like they had week one. They didn't put him in the slot as much last week, which was very confusing to me. But he's seeing 41% of the team's air yards, and he's having 9 targets per game. So I think there is upside for Allen Robinson, who is the favorite target of Mitch Trubisky, and what I would consider probably closer to that elite wide receiver tier, in my opinion, if they use him correctly. So Allen Robinson is sort of like a contrarian play who's not going to pick up as much ownership. But overall, this game, similar to Jacksonville and Denver, just not a ton of plays.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. And yeah, Robinson, the volume has been there for him, and he's certainly been a popular target for Mitch Trubisky when things go south. So certainly some guy who can have usage here against a Minnesota defense that might just be a bit overrated. They've gotten off to big leads and then obviously can capitalize on those mistakes. But Chicago has hopes at home, and I think Trubisky is going to continue to have these roller coaster weeks. So we'll see how it goes. All right, guys, we are closed out for the week here. We did all the games on the main slate, so please hit that like button. And of course, thank you again to Yahoo Daily Fantasy. Yahoo Daily Fantasy, the home of the $1 Million Baller and a lot of no management fee tournaments out there. So go over there right now if you want to get a really easy link. You can go to the Spotlight Stacks and Hitters article from EMAC on the Awesemo.com homepage. There'll be a link in there to go to Yahoo. If you use the promo code Awesemo, get $30 in YSRPs, Yahoo Sports Reward points. There's just like money on there. You can put them in any tournament. You can win money. Then when you win that money, you can take it out and spend it on whatever foolish things that you want to. Let's go right now over to Yahoo. Use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, for your $30 in YSRPs along with your deposit on there. And yeah, that's all I have. Sal, any plugs for you? What are you working on for the rest of the weekend?
Yeah. So yeah, just pretty much I'll have stuff up on my YouTube channel. It's just my name if you want to check it out. My Twitter is @SalBetry DFS. And then I will be live on Saturday with Chris Randone at 11 a.m. to kind of look at final looks at ownership here and just closing out our final thoughts for the week.
Yep. So go keep your eyes peeled there. Sal's been doing a great job for NFL content this year. Go check out his channel. Of course, check out his shows here. It's one with Randones and one of the more popular shows on the channel here with our last minute breaks there. Also check out On the Contrary with me, Osmo, and Ian Hartitz from Roto World is going to be on the show this week. So check that show out at 2 p.m. Eastern time, 11 a.m. my time. That's why I had to do that math. Also check out my showdown breakdown video for tonight's game, which will be coming out a little bit under 5 minutes flat of time preparing for this slate. So I'll be doing that the second I finish this video. So go check that out in a little bit on this channel. And yeah, we have a ton of content going up. So subscribe to that notification bell. We'll be back with you guys again very soon. So good luck in week 4, and we'll see you guys.